Hi, I'm Mark Lodi. We're here in Phoenicia, New York. We're at the Phoenicia Library, and we are specifically in the angling parlor of the Phoenicia Library. This is the Jerry Bartlett Angling Collection. And this is a collection we've assembled of over 600 books pertaining to fly fishing and fishing in general. We have a whole collection of antique art, artifacts, antique tackle, photographs, reminiscences of famous fly fishermen gone by and some who are even still with us. And if you come to the Phoenicia Library, you can even check out a fly rod if you have a library card, just like you would check out a library book. And we're here today to talk about the importance of the iconic Catskill fly tyer, Ray Smith. And we have with us today two of Ray's acolytes who learned to tie flies in the high Catskill tradition from Ray Smith, Mr. Jody Hoyt, aka Lindsay Hoyt.
Lindsay Jr.
Lindsay Jr.,
yeah.
Sorry, and Mr. Paul Hoyt. These two people are cousins, and they are going to talk about their experiences in learning how to tie from Ray Smith. So, first of all, who was Ray Smith? Ray was considered the dean of the Esopus fly fishing community, born 1900, died 1975. And I think from about the mid-30s or the early 30s to really up until his death, he was the preeminent fly fishing, fly tying figure here on the Esopus Creek. He was famed for guiding any number of Hollywood celebrities, allegedly guided my favorite iconic American hero, Babe Ruth, although unsubstantiated, I'd like to believe it, and any number of celebrities, sports heroes, etc. But he's probably best known for his contribution to the Catskill fly tying tradition. Ray has several patterns that he developed that are today part of our iconic arsenal of Catskill dry flies. And Ray himself was considered somewhat of a character. I want to read a couple of quotes about the kind of guy Ray was. One of his teenage students at the time was a guy named Terry Fingers. And we have a book, Tying Catskill Style Dry Flies by Mike Valla. Mike was a well-known historian of the Catskill fly tying tradition, and he corresponded with Terry. And Terry writes back to Mike. He says, although at times Ray was a little cranky in outward appearance, Ray often demonstrated acts of kindness similar to those you describe of the Deddies. As a teenager in the 1960s, I was treated to fishing and tying lessons. He always gave me flies, and I usually came home from Ray's with a grocery sack he had stuffed full of feather and furs. Maybe that's some of your experience. He goes on to say, in spite of having a bit of a reputation as an irascible character, Ray was always kind to young people wishing to learn fishing and fly tying. Jerry Klein, whose parents ran the Bluebird boarding house in Mount Tremper, was a student of Ray's and his successor in becoming the most prolific commercial fly tyer in the area. I came upon story after story of beginning anglers and tyers who, like me, had been quietly taken under Ray's wing. I believe he was proud of his fishing and fly tying and was eager to pass on the knowledge of how to do things correctly. And we're privileged to have here today two of the people who he passed that correct knowledge on to. Guys, what do you remember about Ray? Can you give us some insight as to his irascibility?
He was a chain smoker. That's one thing for sure.
Weren't you the guy who said
and then he'd
he was
start
always...
coughing and blame it on the feathers.
Oh, yeah.
And he'd blow all the feathers off the desk?
That's the feathers.
Yeah, you had to have seen it pretty bad.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think I was more into the fly tying. I was a little kid. I was more okay, and he'd show me how to. Let's do this today, and he'd show me something, and set me up with some hooks and some stuff. Go back over there and have a beer with my father or something,
Now, you were a little kid.
And he'd come back and check up on me every once in a while.
How little were you?
Fifth grade, probably.
Fifth grade?
Yeah, I believe so.
What's your history with Ray?
Well, he married my aunt and uncle, and this was one of his students who probably taught in the 30s, my Uncle Bob Schluty. And actually, my Uncle Bob Schluty first showed me how to tie flies. So when I came to Ray knowing how to tie a pretty good wet fly.
But he married your aunt and uncle? Was he a justice of the peace?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. They used to do all kinds of. My uncle and him used to go fishing quite a bit. But actually, with Ray, my father introduced me to him. I had no idea who he was. Our grandparents had the general store, post office in Mount Pleasant, which doesn't exist anymore. Mount Pleasant. And one morning, Ray used to always come for his newspaper and whatever else he would get, his mail and things like that. And they came in the kitchen. My grandfather was cooking a pound of bacon or whatever in the kitchen. And Ray came in, and my father kind of set it up. And I went to Ray and said, "Mr. Smith, I know you tie flies. Could you teach me how to tie flies?" And from then on, it went on from there. And I used to walk down to his house in the morning in the summers from our place up on 212, and he'd go upstairs in his room, and it was like a fantasy come true. He had a huge desk piled with tons and tons of feathers, and there's a little simple cot in the background, and it looked over the Beaverkill stream, or the Little Beaverkill, as a lot of people here call it, but it actually is the Beaverkill, not the famous Beaverkill, but it is the Beaverkill.
Just down the street.
Yeah,
from the
Little Beaverkill's down in Boyceville by my house.
We went from there.
And this was in the 1960s.
This would be about 1971, 71, 72, 73.
In Ray's last years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And your experience was in the 1960s.
Yeah. Late 50s, I think it was, really. Probably 57, 58. Around there.
And he was at Young's Tavern, and his wife at the time was Bertie Young. Yeah,
and all the fly tying I ever did was right up, just at one of the tables past the end of the bar, and there's a pool table over there, a billiard table actually, and then they had a shuffleboard and stuff, so I sat there, and Ray and my dad sat over at the bar having a beer and telling stories of their own, I guess, and I was over there tying. But I didn't know too much about fly tying at all when I started there. Whatever I did, I figured out by myself, and so Ray was pretty instrumental in showing me the right way to do it compared to what I was doing.
Well, apparently you did figure it out for yourself, because Jody just shared the information with us before we went on camera that he caught his first trout at the age of 3.
Yeah, but it wasn't on a fly.
So,
But then I watched and I saw these guys were down in the stream catching fish when I couldn't, and they were fly fishing, So I got to try this out.
Whet your appetite.
Yeah.
And of course, Jody has been the treasurer of our local Ashokan Papacton Watershed chapter of Trout Unlimited since its inception, really 26 years now.
No, I started up. I got the job because, first of all, Don Tracy moved away. He had been the treasurer, and then Bob. What was his name now? Anyway, he was the president, and his wife was doing it just to fill in, and so I just took it over from her. She just asked me if I'd do it.
Okay. Well, you seem to be one of these.
I started like in 1999 as a treasurer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you went a little further back. Jody seems to be one of the many people in this area who ties flies, but you don't actually fish very often these days, do you?
Not anymore. No, I kind of got out of it when I was on the merchant ship, so I got away. I got into fishing salt water off the side of the ship if we stopped anywhere.
Jody was a former merchant marine sea captain.
Yeah.
And didn't you once tell me you fished 5 of the 7 oceans in the world? Is that true, or did you make that up?
If I went there, I'd probably fished there.
There you go.
So yeah, Indian, North Atlantic, North Pacific,
3,
Mediterranean, one of those guys. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Well, goes back into deep history. So Paul, what do you remember about your early days with Ray?
Well, I remember he was very generous with. I never got to fish with Ray. I actually saw him fishing quite. He used to love to fish right there at that corner in front of. Was it the Du Bois's house, or right where the pines were on the Esopus? They're all gone now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he used to love to get out of the car and just go down that bank there and dab some wet flies. But I never got to fish with him. But
I never did.
I did a lot of tying with him. I would be there like 2 or 3 mornings, and he would set me up. The first thing he said to me, he said, "Can you tie an Adams?" And I really didn't know how to tie dry flies, and so I said no. And he said, "Okay, you're going to tie an Adams." And just as a trade, if anyone ever says there's Ray Smith flies out there, he used to always put a gold tip on the Adams of tinsel on there. That was a thing that was quite common a long time ago.
Right.
And one of the first commercial orders I ever had, the guy said, make me 10 dozen Adams. So I tied him 10 dozen Adams with a gold tip, and he goes, "Oh, I love it." He says, "But don't ever do that again, because no one will buy it with a gold tip on."
Yeah.
What?
No, he used to use gold tips on a lot of things. Yeah.
And he was teaching me how to tie the Adams, of course, which involves muskrat fur. There weren't genetic necks, just didn't exist then. He maybe had a Rhode Island red neck for the hack the brown, and then he had what it was like one step above a barred Plymouth Rock that some people around in the area were starting to try to breed grizzly hackle to be something.
Yeah.
And you would do that. And then he had hackle point wings, which actually were easy because the hackle points on the necks back then were round. And he would do that. But when he was teaching me how to tie it, I'll never forget it. I was doing it, and I'm left-handed by origin. I don't know what Ray was right or left-handed. I imagine he was right-handed.
I think he was.
And he put his hands over my hands, and he goes, "This is the motion. This is what you want to do when you're doing that." And then I remember he handed me the hackle pliers. Hackle pliers. You couldn't get them open. I couldn't get them open as a kid. So he finally gripped my fingers on them.
Squished it.
Yeah, he had really, really tight hackle pliers.
We actually had those hackle pliers in our most recent podcast, which was with Preston Woolheater, you probably know, who actually was bequeathed those hackle pliers. I couldn't open them either.
Wow.
They were
Tight, huh?
unbelievable.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
he must have had strong hands. He did operate a dairy farm for a while, Ray Smith, just up the street on Route 214. He was born in Chichester, a suburb of Phoenicia, just up the street on the Stony Clove. And apparently he worked on the road crew occasionally in the area.
One of the things that I distinctly remember him saying is that FDR was a great man. I worked in the 30s because of FDR. So at some point he must have
He
been.
was part of the WPA
Yeah.
project, something like
Probably,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Although I never read anything about him being overtly political.
I think he was a Democrat. That's what I remember.
All
Just you told me one day FDR was a great man.
Okay.
I distinctly remember that.
All right.
Not that whether he was Democrat or not, but FDR was a great man.
All right. So you had a whole list of questions about what, exactly what Ray was up to and what was his motivation. Why did he do flies this way? Do you want to address some of that?
Sure. The first thing is I'd like to ask my cousin, what was it like tying with him in the early 60s? Because it was very different. One of the things in fly tying is that it's gone through a huge evolution.
Sure has.
One thing, I never learned just wet flies. That's all I learned from Ray. Dry flies, I probably learned more about dry flies from Hank Rope than anybody else, but I had just figured a lot of it out myself.
Really? Hank Rope is a recent iconic guide here in the Catskill Mountains, I think now retired. But the person who's been doing the fly tying seminars in this library for 20 years, I think. I actually learned how to tie from Hank.
Yeah.
Hank's sort of a lot of
Hank's
people
good too.
Yeah.
So I just learned wet flies from Ray, and then the rest once you got the basics down, it's not that hard to figure the rest out.
Yeah, it's all just variations on a theme, but apparently Ray had his own specific themes.
Yes.
And what were those themes?
Well, did he? I remember when Ray used to tie wet flies. He used to take left and right quill,
Oh,
put it
yeah,
on his
no
leg, put
folded
it right
wings.
here on his thigh, and
Oh,
cut,
yeah.
cut one
Like
at a
I've
time.
seen Jody do. I learned that from
No
Jody.
folded wings ever, and you just did them, took matching feathers from opposite sides of the bird.
From either side
You
of the
always
bird.
Cut them right on your thigh right here, so you can pick them up just right.
Mhm.
And then when you didn't really trim the wings like I see people these folded wings and they chop, looks chopped. No, not his. You just had that nice curve, but he didn't like a real long point on the top. He said you hold your scissors right parallel with the top of the feather and just clip that little upturned tip off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Right?
Yeah, he used to put them on his thigh and do both of them. But he used to also do that too. He would do that with mallard, and
Yep.
and he would do that also too with mallard breast feathers or flank feathers to make the wings. If you've ever tried to do that, it's not easy, and it's not easy to do over 24 flies.
Yeah.
You clump them. Well, a lot of people clump it, but Ray used to match each one of those and do that, and it was really
Yeah.
quite
Yeah,
hard.
he
It's quite
actually
hard to
matched
do with
wings
any type of speed.
even with wood duck or anything. He matched it.
From either side of the
Yeah.
duck. Now, to the uninitiated fly tyer, these may seem like trivialities. These are tiny, tiny operations that involve tiny, tiny millimeters of sizing and spacing. But when it's all done right, it renders these flies as these extremely elegant, tiny miniature sculptures.
Yeah.
Each one of these flies is a very specific miniature sculpture. And the more perfect we can make it to the pattern, the more fish we catch, apparently.
This is a Syria 1971 wet flies. I don't know if a frame of wet flies. You can tell I'm left-handed by the way I framed them. But I made these in 71, and definitely after some of Ray's influences in there. There's a whole art to making wet flies right. One of the most common things is that you cock the wing when you put it on there. Instead of it being in line with the hook eye, it's like this. And when you fish that wet fly, it'll act as a helicopter versus smoothly coming through the water, cocking the wings.
You want it to rotate in the water.
No, you don't.
Oh, you're saying
No.
the opposite? Okay.
Yeah, the fish are going to be looking at it going, what the heck's wrong with that one?
Yeah, and of course the wet fly is a fly that is fished subsurface in the water column, typically imitating aquatic insect that's hatching and coming up to the surface.
But you also,
Whereas a dry fly is floating on top of the surface.
this is an actual Ray Smith wet fly. It's called March Brown. Actually, I have two of them.
March brown. Yeah.
There's two of them here in my hand. I guess the contrast in my hand, I don't know if it would be enough contrast because they're kind of tannish and flesh colored.
The marsh brown is a mayfly species. It's a Stenonema vicarium, if you want to get into the Latin. And it's a common fly on the Esopus Creek. And those are the wet versions. Those are the emergers of the Stenonema vicarium.
It's
Elegant.
amazing
Elegant.
how beautiful they are. I mean, I've probably had these things more than almost 50 years, and they're still beautiful. And you can see the style there is just fantastic, and the wings. And then, of course, this pattern, if you look it up, calls for turkey in the wings. But all the fly tyers in the Catskills had problems obtaining turkey, wood duck, and natural blue dun necks. And yet, a lot of flies, Catskill flies, use those ingredients. So by the time the 70s ran around, turkey had gone from being wild turkey. There weren't that many turkeys around here in the 70s.
No.
So he probably didn't have access to a good source of that. So what he used to do is go over to Folkerts and get the vineyard hen wing sets. They look very much like turkey, speckled hen, and he'd buy that. Folkerts, when it was Folkerts there, they carried a line of vineyard stuff from England. They had a lot of advanced fly tying materials. They had on the level of salmon fly tying stuff in there.
Oh.
He carried the wet flies. A lot of the bodies he used were Purcell's Frost. I happened to get this card I found at one time of all the different types of colors. It's keyed in the back, and even the distributors. There is Thomas Tully, Dearborn Street, Chicago, October 27th, 1952. And this is an actual spool of this. They just went out of business a couple of years ago. They're not making this anymore.
Now, are these all silk?
I think it's silk, yeah. And it was used on the bodies of wet fly. Like if the claret net wet fly, that's the color that was used for the body. And Ray would have these kicking around his desk. He'd have a pile of them.
Oh yeah.
And the chaos and disorder, but he knew where everything was.
He'd send you home with a bunch of stuff each time. Here, now take this. Now take some of this here, and you go home, tie some more this week, and when you come back next week, show me how you made out. And
Now, apparently he was very generous with his information and his history with you guys, you young whippersnappers, but not so much with adults.
I never tried it once.
Well, I think that people went in there with some sort of attitude. You know, when you're a little kid, you're learning to play the piano, you can be banging away and you're not conscious of what you're doing, and you're not trying to BS anybody about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think adults sometimes would go in there with him and talk to him, and he, that's, I'm not going to waste my time on this one.
One thing I remember though, Ray used to teach at adult education. The PTA down at the school had adult education classes, and they'd use the cafeteria in the school. And I remember Ray took me there with him one time, and we went in, and there were, wow, there must have been like 20, 25 people in there.
He was teaching tie flying.
Fly tying, yeah.
Fly tying.
And somewhere along the, not too long ago, I saw one of the sheets that he had with the recipes on it.
Yeah, I have
It's all mimeographed. It's like a mimeograph.
somebody at IBM did him a favor and copy, because the IBM,
Oh
there
yeah,
used to be a
says
key number for the copying
yeah.
machine at
Yeah.
IBM.
Right, and then he would
Yeah, I
teach
actually have a
people how to
typed
tie
version of
those
this.
Yeah.
And these are like, for example, the Newville midge. When was the last time you heard about that fly? That's a black tail, a quill body, a black hackle, and a slate duck.
Yep.
Slight variation from any other fly. Gold ribbed hares there, lead-winged coachman,
Oh, yeah.
white-winged coachman, Gordon quill, mallard quill, light cahill, iron blue dun, March brown. This is just one page of.
And the back page of it, yeah, there's
Hold it
the formula
still,
of how to
Mark.
dye wood duck feathers.
hold it still.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that's going to show up.
So the legacy lives on. We still have the essential information as to what they were tied with. You guys know how they were tied.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing was Ray he did pay great attention to his materials and his proportion and his style and so on. He used to, when we were finished tying, because you had, the hackle would vary so much in size, he used to say, you always have to give it a good haircut. You have to give it a good haircut to make it, look right.
Right.
And he also used to dye his own feathers from everything from Rit dye to, I think they were getting stuff from hairdressers. Lady Coral, I mentioned to you, mentioned in the email, the secret of the blue-haired ladies. Now, this is kind of a story that's told by a lot of fly tyers and dyers, is that years ago, women's hair looked that blue-gray that they used to have, older women. Well, if you were sitting in church or something and the sun was shining, it also looked purple, because there's a little purple in that dye. And they were getting the dyes from Lady Clairol. Now, whether Ray got dye from them or not, because apparently the hairdressers were not allowed to sell that stuff on the side, so it was really hard to come by. But he used Rit dye, and he used to dye in his own thing, and then he used to dye, because wood duck was so rare and hard to come by in any type of quantity. A commercial tyer would need thousands of feathers, and a wood duck only produces about 80 usable feathers here in the flank. So he used to take bins and bins of mallard feathers that he got from Schwartz in New York, and he would dye it in coffee. And he used to always tell a funny story that he had a bin of it in his garage, and he had just had his driveway tarred, and the wind came up and it blew it onto the driveway, the tar on his driveway. So that was quite a loss. But if you dye a batch of feathers like that, it's quite an operation. I didn't actually get to see him dye any, but I used the formula and did it the way he taught me. And my mother was very tolerant, because he used to first dye them in the coffee in a pot in the kitchen, and then you take them out and you put them in a pair of pantyhose and you shake them, and then put them in a brown paper bag, and then very quickly put them in the dryer, not on heat, to fluff. And I know my brother used to, put it on heat just to mess me up.
I remember him saying that, the secret is you got to have cream in the coffee. It helps to set the color. Otherwise, it'll wash back out.
Vinegar set, yeah.
That's what he told the people at the adult education class when I was there. You got to put cream in the coffee, and then it sets the color.
Good to know.
You said, unless the cream had vinegar in it, so you use vinegar to set the color.
Sour cream, maybe?
That's what he said.
Soured?
No.
Soured
Use
cream?
regular, vinegar.
That's what he said.
Actually, that saved me. I was in the defense industry for 10 years, and we were having trouble dyeing stuff. Long story short, everybody's hands were coming up black with it. And they got everybody together in a room. What are we going to do about this? Because Grumman keeps on rejecting these boards because the dye keeps coming off in everybody's hand. I said, well, put vinegar in it. And they go, well, how do you know that? I said, I dye feathers. Where'd you learn that? I didn't tell Ray Smith's name, but yeah.
But a great example of how Ray's legacy wends its way through the culture.
I used to use Easter egg colors. After we did the Easter eggs, I'd keep the gums and dice on feathers. But that had vinegar in it too, so there you go.
Well, let's take a few of his patterns. One of his best known and probably most effective patterns is the red fox.
Mm-hmm. Red fox, I don't think I ever tied that with a ray.
Yeah, Preston just tied some of those this spring, and they're in the store next door. I remember seeing tons and tons of them. He used to put his flies in Petri dishes, at least in the 70s, and he used to have them in there, and then he'd come down in the afternoon, I guess, bring them to Folkerts. And so I know for a fact that he used to tie 4 dozen flies in the morning, and I'm not quite sure if he made another 4 in the afternoon, but at the 3. So because I used to go there, Bertie used to say, "You want anything to drink?" And she'd give me like a Coca-Cola, and I think Ray had a little something extra with his, but we would go downstairs in just a few minutes, and then I would go away. And but Ray, I know for a fact, used to tie at least 4 dozen in the morning. He used to get up at 5.
Now, for anybody who ties, they would recognize that as a prodigious output. Excuse me, but we have it on good authority, specifically Ray's son Cal, who just lives up the street, that Ray tied between 12 and 15,000 flies a year.
Yeah.
So you break that down into how many per day, and he must have been extremely fast hands, extremely prolific. We were talking earlier about how he was the coach of the local baseball team, the Lanesville 9, and a good baseball player. And I remember one of the stories about the Lanesville 9 was that Hank Greenberg, the famous slugger from the 30s, 40s, came up, played an exhibition game with him, and they had 3 baseballs that year, and Hank Greenberg hit 2 of them so far out in the woods they could never find him. So they had to finish the season with 1 baseball. So
I think one of the things you have to think about is that when someone ties that many flies, the whole procurement problem of getting the hooks,
right.
getting the feathers. One of the things that a commercial fly tyer has to strive for is consistency. You can't tie an Adams and it looks a little bit this way, and then the next one looks a little bit that way, and the next one looks a little bit that way.
Right.
You have to be fairly consistent in doing it. And I think his procurement must have been really tough. And knowing how many feathers he had to dye and how many necks he had to have of this color and things like that. I know he used to go, if we went to New York, old man Schwartz used to let him pick through the stuff and come back with what he wanted. Apparently they had some sort of relationship and friendship going. And the other thing is that just the dyeing of all of this stuff. Now I know Folkerts kept him supplied, but before Folkerts, I don't even know what type of hooks that he was using. I think he may have been using Alcock hooks or Bergman hooks or something like that.
I had some hook boxes. I might still have a couple of them around. They were English hooks. They were from...
If they're Alcock, well, they're worth a lot of money. But
Hardy's.
Bergman was also importing hooks too. But I never heard Ray mention anything about Ray Bergman. Never heard him mention that.
And we should mention Folkerts was the fly shop, the sporting goods shop next door. Yeah, actually next door, right?
Yeah.
And the Folkert brothers were legendary in their role in Esopus fly fishing history. Long gone. Today it's a hardware store. They do sell flies. So the Folkerts was a huge part of our Catskill fly fishing tradition.
Yeah, they were.
Do you remember the Folkert brothers? Did you guys?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Herman and Dick.
Herman and Dick.
I mean, that was an old joke. Yeah.
2 irascible Germans, right?
I used to get I still had a hunting license from there, and they have my name spelled Hoydt.
Yeah.
They liked my mother because my mother was German and Austrian. So, but they used to always joke about it. Everything was the finest.
They did. They had
Way
high
ahead of their
quality
times.
stuff.
Yeah.
They did.
Well, some of this literature mentions how Ray would occasionally come in, and Folkert brothers says, "So, Ray, what'd you catch that big trout on?" And he'd look around and he'd say, "Oh, this bin is really full of iron blue duns, and this bin is empty, so I caught it on an iron blue dun." Everybody would rush to buy the iron blue duns up. So,
Yeah.
Like that.
They used to be
Three
storytellers too. I remember one hunting season somebody
the
went
3-fly rig. Yes.
At,
So we've been prompted to talk about the 3-fly rig.
the
Yeah,
3-fly rig.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
since
He's
I make those on a regular basis.
I think one of the few people who still does that, by the way. That's been a lost tradition, I think, that's coming back.
Is believe it or not, the basic formula for a 3-fly rig is right in McLean's fishing encyclopedia now.
Okay.
I know Ray was making 3-fly rigs long before McLean's put it in there.
Mm.
What it basically is really stiff nylon, probably 20 pound,
Really?
15, 20 pound nylon, and that's the whole rig. There's no tapering, no nothing of that. And then there's various combinations of flies. Like Ray Smith had certain combinations of flies that he liked to put in there. Dick Tallur had a certain combination of flies that he liked to put there. Ralph Hoffman had a certain combination of flies in there. Paul Hoyt has a certain combination of flies he likes to put in there. But if you hit somebody who's fished the 3-fly rig up here, it's like religion. So you got to have the light Cahill at the hand, with the hand being the closest to the rod, because you have the 3 flies dropping down.
Right.
Then in the dropper 2 position, you've got to have the hare's ear, and then at the tippet, you got to have a lead wing coachman. And there's no other way to fish it. You can't do that.
And what is your formula?
My formula is I keep changing the flies on the whole thing because I'm I'm like the scientist out in the water. I'll spend an hour looking at bugs on the water than instead of fishing.
But I'd almost always have lead wing coachman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the,
And sometimes I'd have a black gnat or something. And I use dark Cahills more than lights, probably.
I found in the records that I kept, I have a little logbook up in my house, that the light Cahill seems to be working more and more these days than the lead wing coachman, and also, oddly enough, the royal coachman seems to have made a comeback in at least my fishing.
Well, the lead wing coachman's really like blue wing olive,
Yeah.
It pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one thing I'm finding is a lot of these flies that were popular 30s, 40s, 50s, hairwing royal coachman, for example,
Oh, yeah.
are now coming back. I'm tying them myself, and they work then. Why wouldn't they work now? Well,
They work
do
great.
now.
Just go over Mount Pleasant and fish the riffles. You'll catch fish.
Yeah.
You might get introduced to every 7 or 9 inch rainbow in the stream, but you'll catch fish. Although surprisingly, I had my son out a couple of years ago, and we were fishing. We were just screwing around. We were dressed pretty much like this, and we were out there with the wet flies, and he landed into a 14-inch brown trout over in there. That was quite a surprise.
The Montreal, too, I always like that. Now, Ed Estopchik ties them on a size 8, I think. Not 8, I'm sorry, 4. He makes them really big.
Those are pretty big.
I never did. Mine were always on 12s.
And what is that pattern?
The Montreal, you got a gold tag, and then you got a little red floss, and then it has a peacock body, brown hackle, and a turkey wing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There's also another cult too that I don't know if Ray ever tied for them, but there used to be a group that used to fish for brown trout at night with wet flies, big wet flies, like size 4, 6.
Ralph Hoffman.
On rigs. That was going on here, I think, in the 50s and 60s. I think it's Jim Bashline actually wrote a book about night fishing for brown trout, and some of the formulas for the rigs are in there. But Ray would make the rigs, of course, at his place, and then he'd have to write them all up and so on. And when he was making them, he'd have this big spool of nylon like this. Obviously, came from a commercial operation, and he'd just pull it out, and he'd be making the knots like that. He could do one so fast.
Did he ever incorporate the labor force of you young acolytes in helping him dye, or ever put you in an assembly line position?
No.
It was all things he did by himself.
What he would do is he'd set you up, like you were saying, and you'd be tying, and you'd tie a few flies, and he'd come over and look at them.
See how you were doing.
Yeah.
Maybe give you a couple pointers, and then he'd go away again. He'd leave you there just
Wow.
going on your own. He'd set stuff out for you.
What a great opportunity. I bet you guys didn't even realize how lucky you were at the time. You probably thought it was...
Well, I joke and I tell my wife, I'm classically trained. I could go around and say that. We are classically trained. We were trained by a great master.
Yeah, that's true.
What finer lineage could you have than that?
Well, that's why we feel it's important to carry on that lineage, to carry on that knowledge set. And that's part of what the library is doing. This is one of 8 podcasts do we have so far?
They're all great.
I
I
was-
listen
I
to
was
them all in
12.
winter.
Yeah.
I listen to all of them.
Yeah.
Well, I was tying flies.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Dating back to, and these are all available on the website, catskillanglingcollection.org, interviewing some of the old masters, some of the old students of the masters like we're doing today, going way back into the history of the Catskill fly fishing back into the early 1800s. The Stony Clove Creek is right outside the door here. That had been fished since literally the early 1800s, one of the early go-to streams. The quarry was all brook trout at the time. And there are innumerable accounts of people catching 200 trout before breakfast by the basketful. Apparently these creeks were teeming with small brook trout. back in the day.
Grogkill was too at one time. The Grogkill.
The Grogkill.
used to have a lot of
Yeah.
brook trout up there.
Yeah, have you ever fished there recently?
I haven't been there recently. I know someone has cages over the stream or something
Oh,
like that.
jeez. Huh.
Hmm.
No, I was wondering that. Because I know Ed Cahill used to go up there and catch brookies.
It's actually mentioned in a guide in 1900 about people fishing in the Grogkill.
And
So-
that's why I was wondering if that wouldn't be one of the streams we should check out for the heritage brook trout.
Definitely.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Mhm.
I used to catch a ton of brook
Yeah.
trout up there. Someone may have stocked the pond, but I actually went up there and used to fish there all the time as a kid, up in the headwaters. And, you know,
Our Trout Unlimited group is doing, sponsoring, partially financing a genetic study of trying to determine where the original pure strains of brook trout still exist around here. So we've sampled 2 streams so far, which shall go unmentioned.
try the head of the Grogkill,
Okay,
way up there.
Yeah.
good to know.
That's what I was
And of course, the brook trout is the state trout of New York. And we refer to them, especially when the male is in his fall spawning colors, we refer to him as our Catskill jewels.
Yes, they are.
Extremely.
Jewels all year long.
Yeah, but especially in the fall, those spawning colors.
I'm
So-
working on a brook trout project, but I don't want to reveal where it is at
Okay.
this time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when you do things like that,
Yeah.
all of a sudden everybody starts showing
Well,
up.
that's why.
In this internet age, that's unfortunately true.
Yeah.
So we have to be somewhat guarded with our information.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if we have any more time. If you want me to get into the mystery of the Ray, the fly frames that Ray made, or
I think we should at least show some of them.
Yeah.
We're at 40 minutes. I think we have more time. Do we have any people in the chat room? Okay.
okay.
Yeah, so let's show that off.
One of the things that Ray made, at least I actually got to see them. I never got to see him making them, but they were around.
Yeah.
But this is kind of bad. This is a small picture of it, but these are the frames that Ray made. There used to be one in Folkerts across the street. Different people would buy them from him.
Cahill Rainbow Lodge.
Glabo Raj had, my
They
Uncle
had
Bob
one,
had
yeah.
one. I think Dave Booton may have had one up in Margaretville.
I know there's one in the Catskill Fly Fishing Museum in
Right, and
Livingston.
I think this library has one. Beth said I think they have 2.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Right.
We should put that on display.
Anyway, I ran across an article on them. It was in the I forget this guy's name, but it's the framing of Ray Smith's wet flies, and he gives a little history and how he ordered one. So I checked it out, and I went in and checked the flies out, and sure enough, they were there. But then when I went to the center flies, which are streamers, I was looking at them, and there's the gray ghost, and then there was the black demon. And okay, it's all right. And then there's the Canes River Silver Doctor. I said, what the heck is that? And just for information, the Canes River is in Alberta. And I said, I never knew Ray to fish anywhere there. But as we mentioned, the Darbies had painted in McLean's fishing encyclopedia, he paid him to do the flies. And you can see the influence in there from the Canadian salmon flies and tied by H.A. Darby and things like that. But then I was thumbing through here, and then I see the Canes River Black Demon Streamer in there, and this was tied by, sure enough, Harry Darby. And I'm like, why did Ray put a Canadian fly from the Canes River in Alberta in that frame? And all I can think of is that maybe he knew Harry Darby, maybe they talked a lot more than we know about. I don't know. But there it is, and he probably had a copy of this, and he probably just opened it up and said, that one looks good. put it in there.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious now to see in the library's collection which 3 flies are in the center of there, because I know he varied it a little bit.
We should dig that out. I had no idea we were in possession of that.
Original research. So that's a very interesting thing to me. And you know, was Ray possibly tying flies for somebody in Canada? Was Harry Darby? Because I know Harry Darby had a little bit more of a greater world perspective. Not to diminish what Ray had. Ray, I'm sure, tied for a lot of people. I'm sure one time when I was a kid, when we were tying up there, that Dick Delore stopped by, and he's very big on Ray Smith too. He mentions Ray Smith in a couple of his books.
Paul, did you ever see Ray tie with anything but black thread?
No.
Me either. Always black
Oh,
thread.
no, Adams sometimes he'd use white. Yeah, and some of these flies,
Oh, yeah?
maybe it faded
I
out.
only ever saw him use black.
There was, well, you were a kid,
only
and
thing he
thread
ever
was
showed me
very,
was black.
very limited. By the 70s, Herb
all
Howard
silk.
thread came out, and that was the first real nylon thread that was worth of anything, I guess, for a fly tyer. But you know, look at some of these have white heads. I remember him tying Adams with white thread.
Well, one of these biography inserts mentions that, at least in the early days, he used exclusively white thread.
Well, that they probably were using some derivative of
Well,
silk. Yeah.
probably maybe that's the only thing available.
You want
at
to
the
look at
time.
these quick. Those are Ray Smith's flies. You can see there's a bivisible in there, which was a very popular fly for the longest time.
And here's your cream variant.
Yeah.
No, well, actually,
I
that's a
think
light
he used to
Cahill.
call everything like that sulfur. One of the things that he was using towards the later years too was Arctic fox fur for the body. He was big on Arctic fox fur.
And where the heck did he get Arctic fox?
I guess it was just coming
Probably
onto the
from-
market. Yeah.
Yeah. All these materials for our nascent fly tyers, see people don't fly, all these materials are now commercially available over the internet.
Yeah, this one's
And when we refer to genetic hackle, these chickens that are used to tie these flies are specifically bred, first of all, for color, and secondly, for the texture of the flies. So that has upped the fly tyers game tremendously from the type of material that Ray was working with. I think this is actually like Cahill.
Let's see what he's got in there. No, those are hackle point wings. It's probably sulfur.
Sulfur?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
sulfur.
it's a sulfur,
That's a
yeah.
sulfur, yeah.
Okay.
And he,
Just
at this
elegant.
time in his career, which would be the early 70s, he was using mustad hooks. Okay, what he used before that, I remember my father told me one time that Ray
There's one
Smith's
in your
flies, and
white
that's
thread.
supposed to be
That
during
one
the
is white
30s,
thread.
were 3 for 25. 3 for 25 cents.
That's
And he said the rap against Ray Smith's flies is that when you backcast, this may have to do more with my father not being such a good caster, was that the point broke off. And he said you'd be out there on these Esopus fishing and you get hits, but they weren't hooking up, and then all of a sudden they realized the point was broken off.
the point of the
Yeah.
hook.
That used to
Point of
happen
the
a
hook.
lot,
Oh.
especially if you were fishing along the riprap. I used to fish from the side a lot.
Well, it's going to be hard to pick this up on camera, but these are tiny, tiny little sculptures, and each one is a perfect replication of the next one.
Well, maybe I put them on the envelope as a
so-
white background
Here's
to pick up, with Ray Smith's address on there. Just rest them on top or something.
Does that help you? Okay. So you can see how sparse this material is, how precisely it is placed on the hook. You can't even see a wind of thread until you get to what's referred to as the head.
Yeah, he was very sparse on his thread
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
And this is another example where he's leaving a very generous head between the hackle and the hook eye.
As a tyer, that's where I have a difference with him. He used to start with just like 3 wraps on the end for a tail. I go the whole body length for strength and so on. I don't know if he was trying to achieve strength. I don't know if strength meant anything to him.
He
or-
told me that I started out that way the first day I went there, and he said, "You're wasting thread and time."
And the
That's what he
Darbies
told me.
used to say that too. That they very sparse style. But the thing with that, if you do that too long, some of the flies will start to come apart. I don't know about.
I'm with you. I think the thread base adds stability.
Yeah.
Also. So I was
You wanna-
use complete thread. You want to read this later?
If you're into selling flies, you know,
Yeah.
if they fall apart, they buy more.
Fly lasts for a year. I know, but people really
See,
don't.
there's a real nice one. There's you can really see is the shape of
The rap against
Ray's,
flies from Kenya is
wet fly.
they people around the world can tie flies just as good as anybody. But the rap against some of the flies from Kenya is that after a few casts, they start falling apart.
And apparently Kenya is a major supplier flies for Orvis now.
Yeah, yeah. The big
And it's
factories
in particular the Maasai tribe, I'm told.
Guatemala, Kenya. Well, there's a trout fishing tradition in Kenya too.
Is there?
Wherever the British went, they put their trout.
Right.
In northern India, you can go trout fishing. Malawi in Africa, you can go trout fishing.
I mean, I've read more than once that biologists, scientists believe that the most widely distributed animal species of any animal on the planet is the rainbow trout. The rainbow trout.
Rainbow or the brown? Yeah.
Yeah, I almost think
Well,
they were going to say
specifically
brown.
for their prize value as a game fish. But maybe the brown trout's taken over by now. We should reevaluate that. But you can fish rainbow trout on any continent in the world. No.
I can read the letter here if you want. This was written on by me on 2/14/73, Valentine's Day, 1973. Dear Ray, I'm 13 years old at the time.
You didn't have a Valentine by then, apparently not.
No, if some girl gave me a Valentine, I probably would have been nervous or something. Dear Ray, I got a big order of 71 flies from my sister's friend. I could easily handle this order, except that it's southern cell because the guy comes from Kentucky. I hope you might know how to tie these patterns or what goes into them. Please write them down for me. And then, I got all kinds of things in here like shiner, streamer, silver marabou streamer, gold stonefly, black stonefly, Henryville olive dry. I didn't know what they were. And I said, I have it here and think maybe a blue wing owl. And then I also write him, I say, I also need some hooks. I need size 20 wet dry fly, $1.80 per 100, size 16, $1.80, and size 12, $1.80. I enclosed $5.40 to him to buy the hooks. And he writes, I said, would you please send them to me at my address? Thank you. I've enclosed $6.50 for everything. See you soon, Paul Hoyt. He writes back, Paul, this is the only one I could find. I looked all through my books. He gives me the pattern for a white marabou. Came up with nothing. Guess this must be dear old Kentucky home. Better tell this guy to send some samples. Sorry, I could not help you. The hooks were up a little, $1 per. Send you 600 under separate cover. Hope they're okay. 16s and 20s can be used on dry, wet or dry. So can the 12s. That's right. Ray Smith used to tie his wet flies on Mustad 94840 hooks. Yeah, they didn't tie them on heavy. It's always been confusing me when you see wet flies that they're always tied on heavy hooks, and Ray used to always tie on Mustad hooks, dry fly hooks. Why didn't you go to California with a gang? Who's taking care of Charlie Brown? That was my grandfather's cat. Won't be long till fishing. Best regards, Ray. Sorry I could not help you.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. You had a whole list of questions or issues that you wanted to address. One of them was Ray's influence on Art Flick. And Art Flick, as many people may know, was the dean of fly fishing on the Schoharie Creek, the valley to the north, also a famous fly fishing river, and the author of Art Flick's Streamside Guide to Naturals and Their Imitations. First published in, you're thinking 1949?
Oh.
47?
Yeah, I think it's 47 or 49.
Oh,
yeah.
This is, I think, third or fourth publication, 1964. Anyway, Art was also instrumental in having the accurate identification of the entomology of the insects we're imitating, and then had some of his own patterns that are today widely used throughout the Catskills that he developed. And so we're interested in how much Art borrowed from Ray.
Well, here we go, because I don't want to, as soon as I walk out of the library here, be called a heretic because it says something bad about Art Flick. And there is nothing to say. My research doesn't show it said, but what it was said is that Art Flick developed a lot of his patterns, the actual fly tying patterns, from stuff from Ray. And I don't see it, but I know it's something that has been said. Mm-hmm. The construction is the same, but that was pretty much true over all Catskill flies.
Right.
Art Flick seemed to use the quill from rooster necks at the time and soaking them. I'm not sure Ray was making quill bodies from rooster necks. He was making it from peacock quill, which is the eye of the peacock, and then erasing it with a pencil and so on. These days, people put them in bleach and do it more controlled. But the colors, the styles, and things like that. I'm going to probably weigh over in the favor of Art Flick, that those are original patterns with him. He may have seen things that Ray made, like his red fox is very close to Art Flick's, but it's the same thing that any fly tyer learns. Once you learn how to tie a standard Catskill dry, you can just vary certain things that defer the body material and things like that.
They're all variations of a very effective, common design.
Yeah.
Dating back to the Quill Gordon, 1898.
Yeah, once you learn how to master one of them, you can pretty much tie the other ones.
Right.
But there are some people who say that he took it from Ray Smith.
Okay.
The man seems to have done a lot of work to say that he just looked at the patterns.
Yeah. So we have input from the chat room.
Yes. Yes. First thing is, we had a suggestion from Beth. She just wanted you to say, just reintroduce our guests before we get to the questions, so everybody knows who they are. Now it's at the end of the program, and also I wanted to point out that this program is sponsored with a grant from the Catskill Watershed Corporation and New York City Department of Environmental Protection. So we thank them.
So thank you to those. And once again, our guests are Mr. Jody Hoyt, a.k.a. Lindsay Jr., and Paul Hoyt.
Actually.
These two people are cousins. I think you're 10 years older than Paul. Is that about right?
I guess so.
I'm
47.
62, so you can add whatever you want to that.
74.
Oh, okay. All right.
12.
So we have a multiplicity of generations here. So, first question?
First question is, what size hooks were you tying? I guess. I think
Mostly I used 12s. Most of the time. I had 20s and stuff too, but mostly 12s.
And people should know the higher the number of a hook, the smaller the hook. So a size 20 is way smaller than a size 12.
Yeah.
very teeny. And I think this question might have been answered, but it was asked, how old were you when you learned from Ray?
Yeah, I was in 5th grade, so whatever that equates to.
10?
Maybe 10,
10 or 11?
11, something like that, yeah.
About the same age. I think it was 11.
Okay.
In your most formative years?
I think I got my first fly tying set when I was in 4th grade and just started figuring it out by myself, you know.
You said Montgomery Wards?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting question. Nobody's talked about nets. Were there any local net makers?
Yes, there were. Folkert Brothers used to have somebody make nets. I remember distinctly used to make them, the old steam bent nets and so on. They were beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember names or anything for that.
Wasn't there a guy that was housed at the former piano key factory that was tying nets, making nets? You remember that?
No.
No.
Was it-
They were a big auction item for some of our Trout Unlimited auctions.
Yeah, well, I'll think of it in a while. His name,
But they were-
Rupert Sandberg used to make nets, but
Wow.
I don't think he really made them commercially. He just made nets. He just liked to make nets.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of them at TU auctions and stuff like
Right,
that.
yeah. I
Rupert
know there were
Sandberg.
local net makers. I don't know if anybody actually had a commercial operation. to my
I don't
knowledge.
either.
Folkerts had somebody make them locally. They'd have them out every so often. I actually saw a few of them, but I don't have any idea who was making them. You probably had some very talented people here because you used to have the factory at one time in Chichester that used to make
Yeah.
cabinets and things
Right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah.
One more. Actually, this isn't a question. This is just some more information on the framed collection of Ray Smith's flies. It turns out that was on loan here for a number of years.
Oh.
But the owner reclaimed it.
Oh.
So the library no longer has that.
Okay. Good to know.
They may be in Margaretville. Actually, it was reclaimed before the fire, which was a good thing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah. This library incurred a fire, and gosh, when was that, Brett? Do you remember? 12 years, 2004, 8. And so the building was gutted. It didn't burn down, but it burned up. So this is all new construction from community input, community donation. So this is all new construction. This building is 98% LEEDs certified. They claim they have no heating bills in the winter. So
Wow.
I'd like to see if that's true, but is it-
2011.
Yeah, 2011 fire.
2011,
Yeah.
okay. But yes, this is now a state-of-the-art library building construction that we have here in Phoenicia that we're very proud of. So-
I'm looking around the room with the books, and there's a ton of information in the books.
Oh,
You
It's-
could-
I mean, it's
You'll
just,
find all kinds of things in them.
oh, it's a lifetime of reading here,
Yeah.
a lifetime.
Yeah.
So, next question.
I think that's it.
Okay,
All the books had to be replaced also. After
the books
fire.
had to be replaced. That's
yeah,
that's
so the whole
correct.
collection had
Yeah.
to be rebuilt.
Yeah, the books were still here, but they all smelled of smoke.
Wow, yeah.
So,
Most old books smell like mold.
yeah, we still got a few of those, I think. But yeah, it's all new collection, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in fly fishing, the history of fly fishing, the tradition of fly fishing, what we're doing today on the Esopus Creek in fly fishing, come up and visit Jerry Bartlett Angling Collection, the Angling Parlor, Phoenicia Library. And again, we thank our guests, Jody Hoyt, Paul Hoyt. We thank the Catskill Watershed Corporation and the New York City Department of Environmental Preservation,
Protection.
Environmental
Protection, yeah.
Protection, sorry, for financing these programs. So if anybody has anything else in the chat room, you got to send it in right now. Otherwise, do you guys have any closing comments?
Yeah, you got to thank Ray Smith for teaching us.
Thank you, Ray.
I want to thank Beth.
Yeah.
For
Thank you,
association with Beth has been for over 20 years.
Beth Waterman is the chairman of our Jerry Bartlett Angling Collection Committee, and a person who is one of the original people responsible for putting all this together in the first place.
And I'd also like to remind everybody that the Esopus and all the feeder streams going into it are a very, very special thing, especially since you're only about 100 miles away from New York City here. It's a glorious thing to have, and we should do everything we can to keep it that way.
45% of New York City's water.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I'm a professional fly fishing guide. Well, prior to the pandemic, we were guiding people from all over the world. This is a world famous rainbow trout fishery. I guide many, many anglers that the Esopus Creek is on their lifelong bucket list. We live here. Well,
Yeah.
you don't, you did, but we're thrice blessed. We're 4 times blessed to be in this incredibly rich, historic watershed. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Signing off.